Was the Roman Empire already a ghost before it crumbled? Did emperors truly wield power, or were they puppets dancing to a tune played by shadows? Could a child's whisper topple an empire? And what if the gods themselves were tired of being worshipped? The air in Rome, 392 AD, tasted of dust and desperation. Not the glorious sun-baked dust of conquest, but the gritty residue of a kingdom fracturing. Valentinian II, a boy king barely past his teens, had choked on his own ambition, a self-inflicted wound that lit a fuse of civil war. It wasn't a grand, theatrical assassination, no dramatic dagger plunged into a chest. Just a quiet, lonely death in Milan, a city already weary of emperors and their endless squabbles. And then, the whispers began. Arbogast, a hulking figure of brutal efficiency, emerged from the shadows, a man sculpted from granite and fueled by a chilling loyalty. He wasn't a traditional emperor, not really. He was a soldier, a protector, a man who understood the language of force. And he spoke the language of the Senate, promising them a victory for the old gods, the very gods the new, crescent-shaped empire was trying to erase. Suddenly, the altar of victory, long hidden beneath layers of Christian piety, was being unearthed. It was a declaration of war, a primal scream against the rising tide of Christianity. The Emperor Honorius, a boy of 8, was a pawn in a game he couldn't comprehend. His father Theodosius, a man who'd cleaved the empire in two, had died, leaving a legacy of division and a son to inherit a kingdom on the brink. And then Arbogast arrived, a whirlwind of promises and threats, installing Eugenius, a Christian with a penchant for old Roman ways, as the Western emperor. It was a bizarre alliance, a desperate attempt to hold onto the vestiges of a dying world. But the East, ruled by Arcadius, was a different beast entirely. Rufinus, a shadowy eunuch, was the real power behind the throne, a spider weaving a web of intrigue and manipulation. He wasn't interested in grand pronouncements or military glory. He was interested in control, in consolidating power, in ensuring that the Eastern Empire remained a fortress against the encroaching chaos. The Battle of the Frigidus, September 5, 394, wasn't a battle. It was a spectacle of divine intervention, or perhaps a desperate plea for it. Theodosius, the last emperor to rule both East and West, marched west with Stilicho, a half-Vandal general who had risen through the ranks through sheer force of will and military brilliance. His wife, Galla, a woman of formidable intelligence and unwavering loyalty, insisted her brother hadn't committed suicide. Theodosius, a man haunted by the weight of an empire, needed to know the truth. Then, the wind came. Not a gentle breeze, but a furious, howling gale that ripped through the ranks of the Western army, scattering arrows and sending soldiers sprawling. 3 different Christian historians recorded the event: a divine hand, a miraculous intervention. Sazaman added a chilling detail: a demon, a malevolent spirit, appeared at the church where Theodosius prayed, taunting the Christian cause before dissolving into the chaos. Stilicho and Alaric, the Gothic war leader, spearheaded the attack, crushing the Western army with ruthless efficiency. Eugenius and Arbogast, witnessing the carnage, took their own lives, a final, desperate act of defiance. It wasn't a glorious victory, it was a brutal, decisive end. Theodosius, exhausted and disillusioned, died the following year. His sons, Arcadius and Honorius, were left to rule a fractured empire, each isolated in their own domain. Arcadius, a timid and easily swayed ruler, was guided by Rufinus, the eunuch, a man who saw power as a game to be played, not a responsibility to be borne. Honorius, a boy king, was entrusted to the care of Stilicho, a barbarian outsider who had become the empire's most trusted general. But Stilicho's rise was a precarious one. He was a brilliant military strategist, a master of logistics, but he was also a foreigner, a half-Vandal, and a constant threat to the stability of the empire. His wife, Serena, a woman of fierce loyalty and unwavering determination, was his anchor, his confidant, his shield against the venomous whispers of the court. Then came Alaric, the commander of the Gothic regiments. A veteran of the Frigidus, he tasted Roman blood and craved Roman glory. He wasn't seeking to rule, he was seeking recognition, a place at the table of power. But the Eastern emperors, preoccupied with their own internal struggles, ignored his pleas. Alaric, a man consumed by resentment and ambition, declared himself king of the Visigoths, forging a new nation out of a collection of disparate tribes. The Visigoths weren't a unified people, not in the traditional sense. They were a confederation, a shifting alliance of warriors bound together by a shared history, a shared grievance, and a shared leader. They were refugees displaced by the relentless expansion of the Roman Empire, driven west by a combination of force and circumstance. Their rise wasn't a triumph of unity, it was the birth of a nation forged in the crucible of displacement and defiance. And they were hungry. Rome, weakened and divided, was an easy target. Alaric's army, fueled by resentment and a thirst for plunder, descended upon Greece, ravaging the countryside and leaving a trail of destruction in its wake. It wasn't a calculated campaign of conquest, it was a desperate act of survival, a primal response to the humiliation and marginalization they had endured. The Eastern Emperor Arcadius, weakened by Rufinus's machinations, was ill-equipped to respond. His armies were scattered, his resources depleted. And then Eutropius the eunuch, a man of ruthless ambition and unparalleled cunning, stepped into the void. He'd recognized Stilicho's power, his control over the Western army, and he'd decided to exploit it. Claudian, the imperial poet, captured the horror of the assassination with chilling precision. The story isn't about a grand conspiracy, it's about a single, brutal act of violence, a moment of uncontrolled rage. Rufinus, the puppet emperor, was dragged through the streets of Constantinople, his body torn apart by the soldiers, his eyes gouged out, his limbs severed. It was a spectacle of savagery, a testament to the depth of the empire's decay. Stilicho, realizing that he was now an enemy of the state, retreated to the west, seeking refuge among the Visigoths, but his fate was sealed. Alaric, recognizing Stilicho's military genius, offered him a choice: serve as his general or die. Stilicho, a man of honor and integrity, refused. He was executed, a victim of his own loyalty and the empire's relentless fragmentation. Then came the sack of Rome in 410 AD. It wasn't a siege, it was a brutal, uncoordinated raid. Alaric's Visigoths, driven by hunger and a thirst for vengeance, poured into the city, looting, burning, and slaughtering. The streets ran red with blood, the temples were desecrated, and the symbols of Roman power were shattered. It wasn't a sudden, catastrophic collapse. It was a slow, agonizing decline, a gradual erosion of the empire's foundations. The division between East and West deepened, fueled by mutual suspicion and political maneuvering. The empire, once a vast and formidable power, was now a collection of warring factions, each vying for control of the remnants of a dying kingdom. The Roman Empire didn't simply fall, it fragmented, it dissolved, it morphed into something entirely new. The legions marched west, the emperors retreated to Ravenna, and the gods were forgotten. The echoes of Rome lingered, but the empire itself was gone, swallowed by the rising tide of barbarian kingdoms. Was it inevitable? Could the empire have survived? Or was it doomed from the start, a magnificent edifice built on unsustainable foundations? Did the whispers of discontent, the ambitions of generals, and the machinations of eunuchs ultimately seal its fate? And finally, a chilling question: if the gods intervened, as the historians claimed, were they cheering on the empire's demise or simply watching with detached indifference?